Michael Clayton, former boss of New Zealand football, joins us, 136. Michael, you've been in the position of running New Zealand football before. What are your thoughts on the way that this whole coaching thing has unfolded? Andrew Pragnell says his most preferred candidate was this guy. Darren was interviewed last December. It doesn't add up when you put two and two together.
No, it doesn't add up. I mean, the whole process right from the get-go. I guess if you really go back to the core of the problem is why was Danny Hay treated the way he was treated, and I think that started the problems. The communications from, and I only heard it from Danny's side of it, but were very poor, and that's the tragedy. Really, is that I think in the first place you really go back to why this problem has been created. Is they had, in my view, a fantastic coach, and who was developing a style of football that was very exciting, and then the powers that be decided they had to make a change. So that's within their rights, and we can all have opinions on whether that's a good move or a bad move. But then to take this long. It's staggering, and no disrespect to Darren Bazeley, who's a fantastic guy and I think a very able coach, and who knows, perhaps the final decision will end up being a good one. But the delays, I don't know how Darren himself must have felt pretty let down by the process, and clearly, he's not been their first choice because they've tried to get others. But others have not taken the bait, if you like, and I would imagine part of the reason they haven't taken the bait is they've had a look at what's happened before and get back to it. So what's the core of the problem? The way they got rid of Danny Hay. I was appalled at that at the time. I had briefly spoken to Danny since, and I think his treatment was probably a very loud warning sign to those that New Zealand football wanted to get. Why would they jump into that particular environment when they saw what happened before? So you really go back to the core of the problem, and then we have the solution that's just seemed to drag on and on and on. So hopefully, Darren, as I say, he's a fantastic person, a very able coach. He has played the game at the highest level, and it may well prove to be a great appointment. But the process itself clearly is flawed.
I'm so glad that you've brought that up, because so few very people will speak about this. Danny Hay was treated appallingly. I believe he was cancelled, and I believe there's a lot of backstabbing that went on into that. And I don't see how that situation could not have been resolved. I mean, I find it very peculiar because Darren, I really like Darren as well as a bloke, same as you. He's been joined at the hip with Danny Hay right throughout his coaching career. I mean, these two, work together. So to be able to sack that guy and kind of pour all this stuff on him, and yet you've actually got the other guy that you think he's the best guy. I mean, it just doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't make logical sense to me.
No, it doesn't. It does not. And again, you go back to flawed processes, Marty. I mean, there was a review post World Cup when New Zealand didn't qualify. That review was led by a very, very able person, a person who I've got enormous respect for. But he does not follow the round ball game. He is actually a rugby man, and yeah, you could argue that if you run those reviews, that you don't need to be an expert at football. But it's sad that there isn't an expert at football highly involved in that, because again, go back to Danny Hay's reign. The style of football that team was playing was absolutely fantastic, and the results weren't coming. But if I take it back to the team I love, which is Arsenal, there was a point at which the Arsenal were bottom of the Premier League, and yet they were playing fantastic football. And the powers that be in that club said that we are going to stick with this because we like what we are seeing. Well, you need football people to make those decisions, but these decisions to get rid of Danny Hay was largely made by people who are not football people, and that is where the problem lies. And unfortunately, when you have and I think Sport New Zealand have got to take blame for that. And I just shudder. It's all very well saying we can have experts in fields of sport. That's fine, but you've got to have football expertise. And I think that the board itself, right back to my time, I used to have people criticise me for papers I wrote on the National League, and yet most of the people sitting around the boardroom table had never been to a National League game in their lives. So you get you get experts who are not experts, and they are making those core decisions, which that plague the game, have plagued the game for years.
Well, yes, I mean decades. I'd say decades it has. It goes back decades.
Yeah. And it's so frustrating because we all love the game, we all want the team to do well, and there are some really good people involved. So it's not like the core ingredients are all there, right? And Darren Bazeley is a core ingredient, but you're right. I mean, he must be pretty shattered through this process, and good on him that he's taken it on. He's a braver man than I am.
Devlin.
Tomorrow! And Queen's Park Rangers have won it!
The platform.
Well, it's a day of celebration. Darren Bazeley gets the All Whites job. Look, he's a decent man. I like this guy. Let's park that for a second because the process, the administration behind this, and Andrew Pragnell standing in front of the cameras and genuinely trying to purport that Bazeley was his preferred candidate all along. It's a hard one to believe, Fred.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone really believes that Darren was the standout candidate that they were talking about right from the off. But, Darren's done really well in probably keeping a low profile early on. And then, they needed an interim coach, and he's done that job well. Stepped in, took the team. The performances from the team have been decent. And so he's basically the last man standing. But yeah, I don't think, I think the process itself, this long drawn out process, not very well handled or not very well run by New Zealand football. And I think, that was I think the disappointing part of this this whole saga of finding the next All White coach.
Look, I hate to ask this question. Does it detract at all from the appointment? And again, nothing about Darren, but it's just that, this is the National Football Association here. I just expect a higher degree of competence in making these decisions.
Yeah, I think they got blindsided a little bit, and they've gone out and they thought they had this absolute standout candidate, which everyone expects now was John Herdman. Over in Canada, and Herdman would have been a great appointment, if they'd been able to get him. But I think you've got to have a dose of realism. The guy's on $700,000 a year, and so New Zealand football are going to be paying $250,000. That's a big gap, and so I think right from the off, you've got to get over that hurdle first. In any discussion about do you want to take the team? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Mate, we're only paying this. Is that okay? That would be your first question, and then but I think ultimately they got blindsided by him pulling out and recommitting to Canada, and then from that point on, I think they were scrambling, and hence it took so long, and finally we end up with an All Whites coach, which is good, which is a good thing to have.
Okay, he was the preferred candidate all along. Who else was in the mix then? Because Darren interviewed back in December for this job.
Yeah, I mean, it was, so, we know that Ufuk Talay was in there. We know that Des Buckingham was in there. I think Des Buckingham was a really strong candidate as well. Ufuk Talay was doing the Phoenix and doing, he would have had to left the Phoenix, I think, because they didn't want someone doing both those roles again, like Ricky Herbert did a few years ago, which I think was actually a good decision, because I think, you want your All White coach being focused on the All Whites when it comes time for these tours and the like. I think, and then there was, supposedly Scott Gemmell was the fifth candidate. I think they've gone through this process, and people have dropped away as they've gone on, and things have taken too long, and and circumstances have changed. And as I say, last man standing, Darren gets the gig. So now we hope that we can just focus on what the All Whites need to do over the next 4 years, because pretty much they've got a pretty easy run into the World Cup in the US.
Fred de Jong is with us, former All White. He's worked on FIFA. He's worked Oceania football as well. Darren takes the under-23s as well as the All Whites. Is that a good decision for you? Because we've seen previous coaches, obviously Danny, doing this as well, and it's worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's from a continuity perspective, it's a good thing. Typically there'll be one or two of those players, the under-23 players, breaking into the All White setup. That's a good I think that's a good setup to have. And now it's also, I think they announced today that the All Whites will have a full-time assistant coach. So putting more resource around the All Whites is also a good thing. And if so that just becomes a financial decision from New Zealand football. Can they afford to do that? And by the look of it, they can, which is also a positive step.
Fred, the fact that he was Danny's right-hand man, and, this is confusing because those guys were tied at the hip. I mean, everywhere Danny went, Darren Bazeley went with him as well. So one guy gets the archer, one guy is obviously responsible for whatever it is he got accused of, and yet Darren Bazeley then comes swimming through the pack and he's anointed. Does that confuse or worry you at all? Because there is a huge connection there between these two guys.
Yeah, there was. So I think probably the negative you could say in there is that Darren's never really had to implement his own vision, because he's always basically been the assistant in the All White setup. He's always been the assistant coach, and now he gets the opportunity to do that. And I think that's now is his opportunity to step out of the shadows of Anthony Hudson and Danny, and now implement his brand of football onto the All Whites. And I think we've already seen a little bit of that. And I think what you'll see more of is that the environment will be very much player-led. I think that under Darren, he's gone, okay, the players experienced enough to make a lot of the calls about how we're going to do things. And so it seems to be very much that sort of mold, a player-led environment. And so it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over the next little while. And like I say, the road for the All Whites is pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You've just got to beat the Oceania teams this time, and you're at the World Cup. There's no intercontinental playoff. You're not playing up against some other confederation team, and you beat the islands, and you're there. And so we have to. We would expect, the expectation is that this team can do that pretty easily because of the level of player that we've got playing for New Zealand at the moment. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the camp evolves over time.
Final question then. You did mention that you think he's done well so far. We had a draw and a win against China here at home. We lost to Sweden and then, of course, walked off during Qatar. You've seen enough in those 4 games, style-wise. And actually, let's also remember that the key to New Zealand's fortunes is a guy called Chris Wood who hasn't played in those games. Yeah,
exactly. I was disappointed in the Sweden game. I thought, we scored early, but then defensive frailties really stood out in that game, conceded 3 goals in 15 minutes. And so I think there was very much a lack of ability to change the script in that game. But, the China games, the first game, I think the 0-0 was a little disappointing. Second game, the win was good. And the first half against Qatar, I think we played well, albeit that Qatar should have scored a couple of goals. We should have scored a couple of more goals. So that game was, through lack of finishing, probably a lower scoring game than it probably should have been. But yeah, so far I think the performances on the park have been as we'd expect. I think we will beat the teams that are worse than us. We will lose to the teams that are better than us.